Hello everyone, I'm going to be doing my presentation on the communication of the people of Sweden. I'm going to be talking about nonverbal communication, intimacy, and emotional expression. So thank you for watching. Okay, the first thing with nonverbal communication in Sweden is that Swedish people appreciate their space and generally stand about an arm's length away from people at all times. Although they have this rule, they're not as strict about it as in some other cultures. In a crowded bus or during a football game, they will stand close to people if necessary. They just prefer to stand further away. In general, proximity is a big part of nonverbal communication, and it gives us an idea about what is important in the Swedish culture. Also, in Sweden, people typically greet each other nonverbally as opposed to verbally. In my research, I found that they are big on head nods and firm handshaking to greet others, but typically don't partake in overly affectionate greetings, such as kissing on the cheek, kissing on the hand, hugging, etc. Those are things that are very popular in other cultures, but that Swedes don't really partake in, at least on a day-to-day basis. Although they do hug and kiss people that they are close with, it's not part of their normal greeting patterns. This plays in not only to proximity, but also explores the nonverbal communication of touch, and shows us that Sweden is more focused on politeness and formality in their day-to-day lives. Lastly, they dress mostly covered up and proper, because it is very cold there. Even their summers, it's not warm there. And they also don't typically dress in colorful clothing. So no shorts or sundresses, but also not a lot of bright colored clothing. To them, this may be a norm, but through the nonverbal communication of dress, they are also conveying a message. Dark clothing may lead people to see them as serious or boring, but others may see them as professional or powerful by how they choose to dress. So all of these nonverbal communication patterns are very similar to those of other European cultures, such as the English culture. When compared to different cultures, these nonverbal signals can be very ambiguous. All of them actually can be super ambiguous, depending on who is interpreting them. To Swedes, keeping distance and showing a lack of emotion in various situations is just how they are. They see it as a sign of respect and politeness in social settings. But other cultures who show their respect through emotion and affection may see the Swedish culture as cold or isolate. So the first thing with intimacy in Sweden is that a person's private life and public life typically do not intermix in communication settings. So not only do people not bring up their private or intimate life in public or work settings, but people also typically don't ask about other people's intimate lives. In other cultures, there is often scandals regarding business people's intimate lives, but this rarely occurs in Sweden. It is interesting that intermixing areas of communication is avoided in this culture because it's typically not avoided in our culture. In fact, I talk to people at work about personal life often. The second thing is that Sweden does follow some role-driven norms in their intimate relationships. In a study with Swedish families, and specifically mothers and fathers, they found that mothers do the vast majority of housework and parenting in their homes still, as opposed to their husbands who do the vast minority of the work. Even if both of those parents were full-time workers, this was found to be true. In that same study, they also found that women typically want their husbands to do more and don't communicate that desire with them, which is interesting. So in this way, these roles are largely shaped through communication, or in this case, like a lack of communication maybe. Maybe if the moms, communicated that they wanted their husbands to do more, maybe they would. Sweden is known, if you know anything about Sweden, you've probably heard about their sex education for children. They have educated their kids about, sexual reproduction more than in most other countries. They fund it more. So that's a big thing with intimacy in the culture of Sweden. They not only educate about reproductive systems and the physiological side of it, but the emotional and ethical side as well, about intimacy and relationships. according to an article in Family Planning Perspectives. So teaching kids about this from a younger age prepares them for relationships and intimacy in the future. And this communication regarding intimacy is pretty culture specific, I would say, because a lot of cultures still speak negatively about intimacy and kind of, instead of teaching children about it, more so shame children who wish to communicate about it or have questions about it. The last topic is going to be emotional expression in Sweden. I think Swedish culture is interesting in this topic in particular because even though it's a European individualist culture, it doesn't value high expression like in other cultures in the same arena. It's typically the more collectivist cultures that value things that Sweden values, which is interesting. So Swedes actually tend to have a depressive expression on their face in just their day-to-day lives, walking around, walking down the street. In Sweden, there's a social pressure for consensus that may be a partial cause of this, but their setting also plays a big role. It makes sense that people who are in kind of darker, colder, cloudier climates are not as cheerful as people, living on the beach under the sun or something. Emotions, when shown by Swedes, are also not shown in public very often, and when they are often shown with the assistance of alcohol. Alcohol does, however, sometimes turn enjoyment into a public thing for Swedes. So typically they don't have a lot of emotional expression, especially in public, except for when alcohol is introduced. And anyone who has drank alcohol knows that it can definitely enhance emotions, but for Swedes, it is actually part of the rare occasion that emotions are shown. And I thought the picture that I found was really funny because after doing research on the culture, it's actually accurate. It's a funny picture, but it seems to be a pretty accurate representation of what emotional expression is in Sweden.